Great. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really surprised that there are this many people that showed up for me. And I'm super happy to be here, a proud alumni. And today what I wanted to do was tell you a little bit about the kind of research that I do as a professor here. And in particular, the theme that I want to cover is designing for happiness. So this is a picture that I really like for a whole bunch of different reasons. The reason I picked it for today is just because just like the face, right? So exuberant, so happy. But really for no other reason than that for today. So if there's one thing that I want to do for you today, if you leave kind of like this with your head kind of exploding, then I'll think that I've mostly done my job. I kind of want to blow your mind. I want to share with you a bunch of different projects that my students are doing. And from that, I want to hopefully change the way you necessarily think about computer science and change hopefully what you think about happiness too. And so the way the talk is going to unfold is something like this. I'm going to tell you a brief snippet, a little motivating story from my own real life sort of, and then I'll show you a research project that actually addresses that problem in my life. So I'll keep each one as brief as I can so that if you get bored, don't worry, something else is coming soon and that sort of thing, okay? So, of course, if you do a talk like, what's happiness, you have to do the Wikipedia, like, what does happiness mean, right? So, this is what Wikipedia says. Happiness is a mental or emotional state of well-being characterized by positive or pleasant emotions ranging from contentment to intense joy. And so, this is a kind of, I would say a good enough definition for me. So let me start by telling you, this is my life probably about 5 to 6 years ago. These are the things that really made me happy. So, right, so this is me, and these are the things that made me happy. So I like playing video games. I like playing all the time, as much as I possibly could. The other thing that I really like doing is watching professional sports, and in particular my Vancouver Canucks. I never played hockey, but I like watching hockey. I actually grew up in Vancouver, so that's why I was a fan of the Vancouver Canucks. And of course, as a computer scientist, I like to write code. Usually I like to do more than write the TCP client sample, but I like to write code. So these are the 3 things that really made me happy. So the first story I really want to tell you about is what happened when I moved to Atlanta. So I moved to Atlanta, which is down here, down in the far, far south of the United States. And as you can see, this is about as far away as you can get from Vancouver while staying in North America, essentially, right? And so you can imagine that actually being a Vancouver Canucks fan was really, really hard living in Atlanta. Not only because the games would start at 7 o'clock Vancouver time, so that would mean I'd need to stay up at 10 until 10, and that's when the game started. And then the game would end at 1 a.m., and so I'd have to go to sleep and basically wake up like a few hours later to get to work. So that was exhausting. In Atlanta, there's very little hockey penetration. And just to give you a sense of how little hockey penetration there is, I looked up some stats. So in the US, unsurprisingly perhaps, if you ask Americans what's your #1 favorite sport, only 5% say hockey. So that's kind of unsurprising in the face of things like pro football and stuff like that, which gets about 35% of the vote. What made it very depressing was that it came behind auto racing, right? Which gets 7% of the vote. And then of course there's a bunch of these other sports. So in Atlanta, when I was living there, watching sports on TV meant that there was very little hockey coverage, right? In particular, for my Vancouver Canucks, if there was anything on it, it might be like a little, I might get to see about 5 seconds of somebody scoring a goal. Typically what I would see is, a score if they had been playing. And even more typically, if they were playing a home game in Vancouver, all I'd see is, the game starts at 10 p.m. So there's nothing to see, right? So this is very depressing for me. Nevertheless, I was still interested in watching the game. So, let's get that computer science machine rolling, right? So this is, so this was actually kind of a cool little problem for me, right? So my mom still lives in Vancouver. There's a digital PVR there. So I bought some stuff so that I could remote control the PVR, right? So we're getting kind of interesting now. And then I set up an RSS feed, set up some servers at home, made it so that it would record the whole show, set up an RSS feed so that it would let me know when the new show had been recorded, cron jobs to download this stuff. And so I'd have these whole games downloaded onto my machine in Atlanta, and I could watch it any time. So it was okay. It's like a day after, but I'd get to watch. And so I was very pleased with myself for about a half a month or so, and then Comcast called me. So instead of just emailing, they called and said, hey man, you're using a little too much bandwidth. So I realized that actually what I needed to do here was to develop some system that would get me highlights, kind of like the highlights that you would see on the local broadcast, right? So hopefully I could get some highlights. And so the question was, how am I going to generate these highlights? Like, is there a way that I can, take the feed kind of at my mom's home and kind of like punch it through some algorithm to figure out what parts of the video to clip and this sort of stuff? Actually, now that I'm saying this, it kind of seems like it would have been a good idea to record the newscast the night of the games, but I never thought of it at the time. Okay, anyway. So one thing I noticed while I was watching games down in the South and having no Canucks fans near me was that actually if you pop onto Twitter while a game is going on and search on, and I did this the other night, so the Montreal Canadiens were playing and the Edmonton Oilers were playing. So if you actually search on hashtags like Oilers or Habs, you actually get a lot of tweets all the time. Like people are sitting there watching the game and tweeting along. So they'll tweet when goals get scored, obviously. They'll tweet when something interesting happens. And I realized that actually if I could tap into this source, I should be able to figure out when something interesting happens in the game. And so I built a system to actually do this. So this is actually a recording of a game. And along the, this is time basically, and the 2 bars represent kind of the duration of the game. And these are the home tweets, and this is just showing you the volume of home tweets, right? So this is kind of from the middle upwards. And then, so this is when you look for the hashtags for the home tweets. This is what happens when you look for the hashtag of the away tweets. And the dark gray stuff is tweets that have both kind of home and away. And so I developed a quick algorithm using some stuff that I found on the web. And, hold on. Oh, this is when actually the home team scores. And this is when the away team scores. So actually here I found a game where my team lost, unfortunately. But anyway, so, and then the algorithm would actually pick out places in the stream where there was kind of unusually high levels of tweeting relative to kind of its neighbors, okay? So it would actually pick out these 3 highlights. So I could actually do an away team, or a home team highlight reel, and I could actually do an away team highlight reel. And the way I did it was I also set it up so I could do both team highlight reels. So I would select all the clips together, right? So does this make sense? Yeah, okay, good. Sort of in teaching mode still. Okay, good. So you might be wondering, so some of these are kind of self-explanatory, right? Like, so this one being picked out kind of makes some sense because it's a goal being scored. Same with this one, same with this one, same with probably the first one as well. There were some unusual ones, like this one right here, where there is no apparent goal being scored, but there were a lot of tweets, right? So, so here's a quick video feed to show you what that thing was actually grabbing. So before I show you the video feed, I want to tell you that I had this idea when I was in Atlanta, but as with all things, it takes longer to code something than the idea in your head. And so by the time I finished this project, hockey season was long over. The Canucks lost the Stanley Cup final, and it was terrible, but it was okay because after that, I was like, I hate hockey forever. The Canucks are never going to win. And BC Lions were on, so I actually did this for football, so American football. So this is what the clip actually. This is that little bump there. And what you're going to see here is at the end of this football play. So this is American football. There's a guy that actually takes the football and starts kicking it around a little bit. So if you don't watch a lot of American football, in spite of the fact that it's called football, this is very unusual for somebody to be kicking the football around. So this is a bit of a long clip, but what you're going to see basically is the play ends, the guy starts kicking the football, they talk about it for a second, and then they show a video clip of the guy kicking the football around. And this is what the algorithm actually picked out. So here he is kicking the football. Okay, and then clips away, some talking head stuff. And the video hiccup because the hard drive wasn't fast enough. And then that. And then so here he's kind of kicking the football around. So this was very unusual, and I guess it was very funny actually. And so as as a fan of professional sports, actually this is the reason why we watch professional sports, because goofy stuff happens like this all the time. And actually the highlight reels that are in the sports broadcasts later in the evening, they have to fit them into kind of 1 or 2 minute chunks, and so often they kind of clip out this sort of stuff. But as a fan, I love seeing this stuff because it's really goofy and really quite dorky. And so this is something that Twitter actually helped us find. So when we use Twitter sort of as a mechanism to kind of clip video, actually, it tells us when kind of some unusual stuff happens, like this football thing, controversial plays or penalties or non-calls. So if you watch sports, you kind of know what this means. Momentum shifting, scoring plays. So I noticed that a lot of empty net goals never got kind of picked out because by that time the game's well in hand, so it doesn't matter anymore. It also finds lowlights like fighting and stuff like this. So this is a really long story, a really long-winded way of telling you sort of who I am. So I'm a computer scientist, and I'm motivated primarily by human needs. And when I say human needs, I mean my needs. I'm interested in being lazy for the things that I want to be lazy in, and interested in trying to find ways that I can make the computer help me be efficient for the things I'm bad at, right? So nominally, I think of myself as a researcher in human-computer interaction. So what that means is I look at building interfaces that help to solve my problems and think about interfaces that can help me kind of be more efficient. So I thought I'd give you a little bit more about who I was and kind of how I ended up what I was to be what I do, or end up blah, 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 you get what I mean. So this is a quick chart, not to scale, but elementary school, high school, and SFU along the bottom. And this on the y-axis, this is kind of how certain I was about what I wanted to be when I grew up. So in elementary school, you kind of start out and you're like, maybe I'll be a fireman, maybe I'll be an astronaut. Those two seem about equal. And so kind of pretty low on the bar. And then the Nintendo came out, and I played for the very first time, and I was like, this is what I want to do, make games, right? So that stayed pretty high for a long period of time, and it took a pretty big dip in high school early on, because I had to navigate this, the cliche of being kind of a computer nerd versus trying to be popular in school, right? So kind of went down for a little bit. And then I found some friends to play Doom with. So that helped to boost it back up. So I could play games, and we could do it in the privacy of our own homes with a modem, and nobody would be the wiser at school, right? So this helped a lot. I got to SFU doing a degree in computer science. I also I did a double major in computer science and psychology because my dad told me that computer science would never amount to anything. As I say that, I realize that I'm not sure that psychology would have amounted to anything either. But anyway, that kind of solved the problem for my dad, so it was okay. So anyway, sailing along at SFU, kind of learning all this computer stuff, networking, operating systems. Loved all of that stuff. And then my confidence took a complete nosedive, and that was when I got my midterm grade back for my computer graphics course. And I realized at that point that I had no business doing computer graphics because I didn't know how to do math, and I felt like I would never figure it out. Fortunately, I did an internship at Microsoft, so I just did an internship at a company, and and there was a girl. So I met her on a whim. She wanted to play squash, so I was like, yeah, sure, let's play some squash. I used to play squash a lot back in the day. Turned out that she was a psychologist working at Microsoft, and I found out that, in fact, what she did was something called user experience, and she evaluated kind of efficiencies of different kinds of interfaces. And in particular, at that time, they were evaluating mobile phones and text entry on mobile phones. And so for me, what I was really interested in was these mobile phones and these mobile devices, because they were really cool, right? So I got to hanging out with her a little bit, and then also one of her designer friends. And it was amazing. It totally opened my eyes. And I realized that actually I could stay in computer science without having to do computer graphics. So the other thing that happened during my undergrad was I went to an academic conference for the first time. This one was called CHI, where they were focused primarily on human-computer interaction. And I saw things that just completely blew my mind, right? Interfaces where they were like building blocks, and you could actually program by stacking building blocks next to each other. I saw really cool visualizations and stuff like this. And so I wanted to tell you this because for me, it went from an all-time low to this ridiculous high in just a couple of years because of a couple of very brief experiences. That internship for me, and then also going to an academic conference. It was amazing, and it made me realize that actually, hey, this is something I want to stay in. So how did I become a prof? this was never a certainty, right? So likelihood of being a professor in my own mind. At the University of Calgary, when I was doing my master's, I had no intention of being a prof at all. At UBC, there were probably some glimmers of hope, maybe. It was fun to, explain things to people, to work with people, and I kind of thought that was kind of cool. Anyway, but the debate for me was always between, like, should I find a real job or not, kind of. I really shouldn't have said that, but anyway, that's kind of what it really was. So anyway, at the end, I decided not to find a real job, and I took up a position at Georgia Tech, where I was a researcher. I taught a class, which was actually pretty fun. So kind of there's a little bump there, and then the class ended, and then I was like, I won't be a prof probably. Maybe I'll have to find a real job. And then the University of Calgary offered me a job, so I was like, okay, well, let's give this a try. So that was actually life-changing, but as it turned out, I think that this is a job that's really well suited to me. Blah, 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 blah. I don't want to get into that. So anyway, so life up to this point was 3 things making me happy, right? Video games, watching sports, and coding. Something changed, and it didn't take a lot. And this totally changed my life. It totally changed what I realized made me happy in my life. This is my son about a year ago, and my wife, and I love this photo. And it was funny, when I was a grad student, there was some presentation foo website out there, and they said, you gotta have a baby on every presentation, so here's my son. And the thing I realized was that my son made me and my wife happy, but the thing I didn't understand at that point was how happy it would make my mom to interact with my son. That is, that my son not only gave me joy, but actually his having the opportunity to hang out with his grandmother actually made everybody happy. Made him happy, made my mom happy. Here he's learning to drink an avocado smoothie, I guess. I don't know why, those things are disgusting. But anyway, so it made my mom happy to interact with my son, and when that happens, my mom is happy, my wife is happy, all of this stuff, just because of this little dude. The problem, of course, is that my mom still lives in Vancouver, still has the same PVR, and she's far away, so there aren't very many opportunities for us to interact with her. So I realized then that one of my core missions should be figuring out how we can build systems to enable kind of interactions with remote family members. And this, I think, is actually different than how we would use Skype to interact with fellow coworkers or other business people. And I'll kind of show you some of the reasons why. It's partly because of the people that are involved. So if you've ever had a conversation with a kid, so the person that's in the foreground is the kid and the person that's over there is the dad, it kind of looks like this, right? What did you do in school yesterday? And the kid's like, I don't know, nothing, right? I think this is because for many kids, talking is not the primary means through which they enjoy interacting or spending a lot of time. Like, think about sitting down and having a conversation with dad, and you're 8 years old, right? Like, this is really painful if it's kind of 5 or 10 minutes. So Lana, who's actually a student at Georgia Tech at the time, and we built this system. This is something that we call the share table. So this is, we built 2 of them, so you can see the 2 units here. Nothing crazy going on here, kind of your standard video conferencing equipment. There's a microphone, a camera, a screen, some speakers. The thing I'll draw your attention to is the table. So there's a little table there, and that's being captured by a camera and actually being projected back using a projector. And so what we did was we mirrored this space, essentially, so that if I draw on one side, you actually get to see the drawing on the other side. And I'll just show you a quick video, and this video is just going to show you how you actually initiate a call. And I'll tell you why this is important in a second here. So to initiate a call, you just open the cabinet doors, and then this kind of, we told Skype, like, hey, set up the call and all this stuff. And then we would have the table just working right away. And here you can see that Lana's put a book on the table. Sanika can actually see what's in the book. And now they're actually drawing together, right? So they're drawing in this space. Lana can draw a little bit. Sanika can draw a little bit. And that drawing, because it's sort of this merged video space, creates this shared interaction space. So the reason why we kind of did this interaction was because we wanted to build a system where kids could initiate the call. So it didn't require an adult around to actually find somebody to talk to and set up that call. So in this case, kids could set up the call. So you might be saying, okay, so you've got a system, how do we know it's any good, right? So in this particular case, what we did was we actually deployed the system to a few families in Atlanta. These were divorced families, so typically the situation would be dad is living by himself, mom is living with one of the kids, and these would be amicable splits. So they still encouraged interaction between child and father, but again, we needed to break down that barrier a little bit. So I want to show you a video of some of the interactions that actually took place when we did this deployment. What you're going to see here is that that drawing space allows them to have a context for interaction rather than looking at each other's heads and focusing on conversation.
Yeah, what is that? Is that DNA?
No, it's like, oh wait, no, it kind of does look like DNA.
That's what DNA.
Except there's no lines. Wait, I think put this in red.
I think you're gonna left-handed.
Yeah, I gave you left-handed.
Yeah, you can totally do it with one hand. Yeah, there you go. There's the DNA.
Wait. Okay, there's DNA.
Yep.
You like it?
Very good point.
What DNA?
So nothing mind-blowing there, but the point is that this interaction space gives them something more to do than just say, essentially, have that conversation. What did you do today in school? In this case, what's going to happen here is the father has a magazine cover, a magazine that he's flipping through, and it's a gaming magazine. So this is his way of kind of connecting with his son. And we're going to see the son's space, and the son actually has a friend next to him. And so this is a way now that the dad can actually get to know his son and also the friend that his son has.
That's it.
You have time to work here yet?
Yes, sir.
Why don't we ever see you online?
I don't know. What's your gamer tag? You guys never added me. See, I don't have you guys. Here. Hang on. Let me write on here, and I can write down my gamer tag. Wait, if you write on here, can he see it?
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say.
So far.
Okay. Here's my gamer tag.
So I think the thing I want you to consider here is that, again, the focus, like where they are looking, is not the screen of the dad. They're focused on the table because this is a means through which they can interact, right? It's sort of a new channel for interaction. The last one is one that is one that I took very seriously, actually, in a bunch of different ways. What's going to happen here is that there's a mother, and I guess in this case, the father actually had one of the kids with him, and the mother has another kid with her. So that family got completely kind of split up. Sorry, a bit more explanation. The kid that's on the other side is sick, and so what the mother here is trying to do is sort of reassure the kid and make him feel better.
Here. Do you see my hand holding onto your hand? I love you, baby. There's her hand. Now, keep your hands and then we're going to do a handshake, okay?
So just a couple things to take away from this. First, on a technical level, you can see that the system mostly sucks. Very low frame rate, very poor resolution, all of these things. But nevertheless, you still get to see these very rich sort of emotional interactions between family members, particularly in this last clip. The second thing I want you to take away from this clip is the fact that actually for the kids here, seeing each other's bodies is actually really, really important. And this really came to light again as I had my son when we started playing peekaboo. So this is not my son, in case you were wondering. This is just somebody I Googled. It would be weird if it was my son because this is a girl. But anyway, when kids play peekaboo, their hands are the thing that they're peekabooing on the other side of, right? I mean, they may hide behind doors and walls and stuff like this. But actually, their hands are part of the play space. Their hands are toys. That means their bodies are toys. And what it made me think was, are there ways that we can actually enable this as a means for playing? Like, can we build systems that allow them to use their bodies as a means of interacting and playing? And we saw that a little bit in that previous clip. They're not playing, but they're sort of, visually touching mommy, right? So I had a whole bunch of students kind of work on this project. This is a project we called One Space. And what we're trying to do is enable free play. So I'll just use this image to try to describe the setup. So typically when you do video conferencing, you look at the other person through sort of a window. In this particular case, what I want you to imagine is that the person sitting here in pink is in one place, like one room, and the person sitting here in blue is in a totally different room somewhere else. And the video, what they see up at the front, that's the same thing that they see, right? So they share this view. And so what you have here is, it looks kind of like a mirror. And so we're both in the mirror together. That's kind of the point. We realized this using a bunch of Kinect cameras, so we had depth, right? So we knew that if it was closer to the camera, it should be in front and all this sort of stuff. And I'll just show you a quick clip of what this looked like. So mom is in one place, daughter's in a different place, and they're both looking at screens. And this is the same screen that they're both looking at. The video isn't quite synced perfectly, but I think you get the idea. And here you can actually see that they are actually, in fact, using their bodies as a means to play with one another, right? I'm playing this, I don't know what this game is. I don't think it has a name. But, so I wanted to show you this video to give you a sense of what that setup looked like. And so in my practice, one thing that we do is when we build something new, we do want to compare it to other things and see whether or not it's any good. And so we, come on video, go play. So we set up a study where what we did was we had one space and we let kids play in one space for a little while, sometimes kids with a parent. And then we also let them play with a conventional video conferencing tool. So we, on the left side there, that's kind of like Skype, right? You get to see yourself in a little window and then you get to see your friend on the other side. And then we sort of set them out and said, okay, go play for a little while. Here are some toys you can play with. We gave them the same kinds of toys and we just watched what they would do. So this is what happened when we watched them using the Skype kind of tool. It ended up being the case that kids would, and the people would mostly play on their own. Here's one instance of a Barbie show where they're just sort of doing show and tell. But here you can see they're sort of drawing independently, they're playing Lego independently, and this is just on a loop, so we've seen this over and over again. And this was consistent across all the groups, basically. And this is unsurprising because it's really similar to that, hey, what'd you do at school? Basically nothing. The interaction space is kind of like up here. It's not where the kids are playing. And so this actually causes a lot of problems if you're trying to have people kind of interact and kind of play with one another. In contrast, when we kind of set them at the one space environment, we had all sorts of this kind of behavior. Basically, again, using their bodies as part of the play space. And so clapping game. Here, actually, it turned out mom didn't know how to do hula hoop. And so the daughter is actually trying to teach her mom how to hula hoop. And they would play tag, and they would wrestle and punch and stuff like this. So again, this is on a loop. But you can see that actually that slight change in the interaction space kind of provided brand new opportunities for how these people interact with one another. Right? So we're, of course, using kind of still standard video conferencing tools. And you can see, again, very crappy, low resolution, all of this stuff. But still, you get this rich stuff just by changing the configuration. So just to talk about kind of some other projects that are in this space of trying to enable kind of interaction with children. One of the students, mine, was working with children with cerebral palsy. These are people that can't control their bodies very well. And in this case, she was working with one child who could only control where she was looking. And so what Maya did was she built a system that allowed that kid to actually draw things in real life. So it would track her eye gaze, and then it was connected to a robot that could actually sort of draw. Cody was sort of the one that led, for the most part, that one space project. So thinking about how video configuration actually changes the way that people interact with one another. And Anna has been working on a project thinking about how can we connect to our older relatives that are living in long-term care, such as hospice care. Can we actually provide means to interact with them, right? And so these are all sort of grad students working in this space, and they're actually sort of the ones that do all the work. Okay, so just to come back then, when I thought about how to make people happy, how to make me happy, and how to make my family happy, I realized that at least in one case, it has to do with sharing everyday life and providing new ways to engage people, engage family members in play. So I want to tell you a different story now. So when I was younger, in my youth, right, I played a lot of volleyball. I still do, but I used to play a lot of volleyball. You might not guess it based on my stature, right? I'm not sort of your prototypical volleyball player, and I think for this, so I'm kind of stocky, obviously, sort of heavy. I think for this reason, I actually used to sustain a lot of injuries. I would roll my ankle all the time, and early on in my marriage, this was fine, right? My wife still loved me a lot back then, and she would take care of me, right? She would baby me, and it was great. This all changed when my son was born. So son's born, I get injured, hurt my shoulder somehow, so now I can't lift it up, right? So I've kind of torn some rotator cuff tendons or something like this. And rather than baby me that evening, she got mad at me because I couldn't carry my son anymore. And this is one of those evenings that changes your life forever, right? So my wife is like, dude, you gotta realize, you're not living for yourself anymore. You actually have to live for this guy too. And so this was really quite a powerful moment for me. So then I started to think a little bit more about health, like my own health and other people's health, and realized that actually if I kind of focus some of this energy which was originally focused on playing sort of on health applications and designing technologies to support people's health, maybe I can make my life better too, without it necessarily being a burden. So if you've ever had a shoulder injury before, or kind of any injury that requires getting some physiotherapy, what this typically means is you need to go to the physiotherapist's office, and the physiotherapist teaches you some exercises. And actually this was a huge burden. And so I started to think about whether it would be possible actually to do physiotherapy when I'm not co-located with the physiotherapist, right? So that would be me on the left, physiotherapist is on the right. And here it is kind of in that one space configuration, right? So I kind of imagined whether or not this would be possible. It turns out that this kind of shoulder injury is actually a very common everyday injury, particularly for older adults. And so one of the things like I said, I thought about a lot was whether or not it would be possible to do physiotherapy remotely. So I had a student, Cody, work on this project for a while. We interviewed some physiotherapists, we built some prototypes. It was actually very interesting work. Related to my particular problem at the time, I wondered whether or not it'd be possible to actually build a system to actually coach me through some of these exercises, right? Because a lot of the Kinect games that you can get for Xbox are like, teach you how to do yoga and all this stuff. And I thought, oh, maybe you could do some physiotherapy with that thing. Sort of related to this stream, Sam is one of my students. He's been looking at how we can actually support exercise for older adults, and in particular, dancing. So it's pretty cool, actually. Okay, so back to my story about the shoulder injury. So if you have ever had a shoulder injury, this is sort of what you do. You go to the physiotherapist's office. The physiotherapist teaches you some exercises, so you do them in the office. And then he gives you a sheet like this, and he says, okay, go home and do these exercises. So you take the sheet, you go home, you kind of do the exercises. It's very boring. And then you go back to the physiotherapist. And then you go back to the physiotherapist next week, give them another $50, and they're like, oh, you're totally doing it wrong. And then they measure kind of how you're doing, and they say, oh, you've gotten worse. It's probably because you were doing it wrong. And so, there's got to be a better way. And so one of the quick sketches we came up early on with was something like this, right? Like, why couldn't it be like I do the motion at home, and the Kinect kind of operating as a mirror shows me like, hey, this is how you're supposed to move, and you're doing it wrong like this. So Richard, actually, master student, great guy, started actually working on this project for me. And you can see sort of what's happening. I think this should play on a loop. And what we've got is a bunch of trackers on his arms and elbows and shoulders, and we're actually generating sort of a model of what your arm is actually doing. And these are actually some of the exercises that I had to do, and I would get them wrong. But so these are some of the exercises, and this is being tracked using a motion capture system, of course. And it turns out this is the motion capture system that you would use if you were building video games and stuff, so I still got to do a little bit of video game-like stuff. And so these are the exercises, and this is what the system that Richard built did. So here you can actually see Brennan, and this video on the bottom left, this is what you would see if you kind of like snuck into the living room while Brendan was doing his exercises. And the thing that you see on the screen, that's what Brendan sees, right? So you can see that Brendan can see himself as if he's in a mirror. And then augmented on that, you can actually see this guide that basically says, hey, this is what you're supposed to be doing. So I'm going to hit play on this video. And what you're going to see is as he completes the motion, it kind of gives him some green stuff. When he's doing it wrong, a little red arm pops out and says, hey, this is where your arm is actually supposed to be. And so Brendan is actually actively reconfiguring his arm so that it kind of tries to match the red thing. He's not perfect at it, but he's pretty good, I think. So this is a realization of that idea. And when we tested this in the lab, we were able to show that, in fact, this kind of system helps people to do these motions correctly more of the time, more closely, in comparison to having nothing, obviously, and in comparison to having a video, just a video of the exercise and you just kind of follow along, which is actually more than what most people actually have when they're doing these exercises at home. So this actually helped a lot. You know, I told you that we're using this crazy motion capture system, which is probably not something that you would have at home. But the idea is that, you know, in a few short years, Microsoft will release another Kinect that will have this level of precision, perhaps. You know, somebody else will solve these problems. As we were working on this problem, though, we started thinking about whether or not it'd be possible to actually outfit those. So rather than have those tracker balls on his wrist and shoulder and elbow, whether it'd be possible to actually outfit him with sort of wearable sensors. And this got us thinking into this space of sort of wearable computing. And this is something that you might have, actually. This is the Fitbit, right? And it's essentially this glorified pedometer that kind of syncs with your computer and does all this really cool stuff. But this is just, to me, the tip of the iceberg, right? Computational power is insane. If you think about the phone that's in your pocket, I was reading some stat, right? The phone in your pocket is something like, you know, 1,000 times more powerful than the thing they used to send people to the moon, right? Or something insane like that. Like, so sensors are getting quite small, and so that means that we can do a lot of data collection on this stuff, and we can do a lot with this data potentially. So one of the projects that I have going on is something called Big Data on the Small, and trying to figure out whether or not we can get insight from this personally collected data. So just to set the context for this, what I'm talking about is collecting data about ourselves and using that to kind of live a better life, right? So just to set the context for this, Calgary is a very pretty place. It's cold sometimes. It turns out that we are the winner of a very dubious prize, dubious distinction, and we are actually the migraine capital of Canada. We have more people in Calgary suffering from migraines than anywhere else in Canada. Part of the reason for this, they think, is because we get these Chinooks, so there's kind of lots of pressure changes, but actually it turns out that they don't know. Anyway, so we are working with these folks. It started with a student named Haley, and she actually engaged in a project where she asked people that were suffering from chronic illness, hey, do you do data collection about your chronic illness? And if you do, how do you analyze that data? And this is how we ran into the people that had chronic headaches. Turns out that if you have migraines, you probably want to figure out what's causing migraines. So it doesn't happen very frequently. This would be the same if you had some irritable bowel syndrome, that kind of stuff, right? You want to figure out what's going on. And so we wanted to learn what it is that people were doing, so potentially we could build tools to help them. Bon Andriel started on a project where what he would do is he would actually visualize some of this data. And the idea is if we visualize some of this data, rather than necessarily looking at a table of numbers, we can actually gain some insight, perhaps. Wally has been working actually directly with the migraine clinic, and he's building the tool that they will use for mobile phones that allow people to track the duration, intensity of their headaches, and also things that they think might be triggers, stress levels, sleep, that sort of stuff. And then Lisa has been thinking about whether or not we can actually crowdsource some of this analysis. So I'll try to show you what this looks like in a moment. So this is an early screenshot of one of Bon's prototypes. So I told you that he's visualizing personal data. What's really cool about this, so he's just collecting data about himself here, and he's visualizing that. What's cool about it is you can actually see the start time and end time of some of these activities. And actually, if you kind of squint your eyes a little bit, the colors that actually end up showing are the things that he spends a lot of time on doing. So it kind of gives you both this overview and detail at the same time. So this is Bon's project. When I think about what Wally's doing, he's basically asking the question, if we shrink this and put it on a phone, can people actually get the same level of insight? And so Lisa's project, the basic idea is So one of the things that we found, sorry, let me back up. One of the things that we find is that when people are collecting data like this, they sometimes get stuck. They're not really sure how they should actually go about analyzing their data. And so with Lisa, what she was thinking was, what if I actually just send it out to the cloud? What if I just send it to other people? So she wants to send some of the data that she's collecting to other people, and then hopefully other people will send her some data too. And the idea is something like this. When you were in grade 5 writing an essay, you would iterate on the essay, you would try to make it as perfect as possible, and then you would say to a friend, hey, let's swap, right? So you get his essay and he gets yours. And then you kind of grade it for each other and you give it back and you look at it and you're like, whoa, I didn't realize there were this many things that could possibly be wrong with my essay. So it's the same idea here, right? Other people, like we all have our blind spots in terms of ourselves, in terms of our own stuff. And so the idea is other people might be able to shed light on those blind spots. And so who would be doing this? Well, if you're suffering from a chronic illness, there are all sorts of online support groups where people share their life stories and share in ways that such that they can hopefully help one another, right? So we think that this might be a possible avenue to go. One of the things that I thought would make me happier would be to live a healthier life for my son, right? How could I support restorative exercises at home? And this last bullet is kind of relating to all that stuff with the headaches, right? Personal informatics is kind of the term that we give it, and personal visual analytics. So rather than thinking about big data techniques for businesses, here let's apply it to our personal selves to hopefully understand ourselves a little bit better. Okay, one more story. I promise this will be it. I took this just a couple days ago, so it's not quite an accurate reflection. About a few months in to having my son, I'm working on about 3 hours of sleep each night. And one day we run out of baby food. So my wife sends me out to get baby food. And so I don't know what my son eats at this point. So I'm looking at this thing and going, wow, there's a lot here. I didn't realize. And so by the time I got to the store, I had forgotten exactly what baby food to get. So I called my wife up, and she actually didn't know what it was either. But she kind of knew what the box looked like. So I was like, okay, well, we got to figure out how to do this. So I started reading all the labels and trying to describe the boxes. And we realized this was going to be completely futile, right? This is a very slow exercise, right? So then I was like, hey, I have this phone. It's really cool. I have data. Let's do a video conferencing call on this thing. And so I called up my wife, and then I would hold up my phone, and I'd be like, okay, is it this one? No. Is it this one? No. Is it this one? And I was actually just panning across. So it kind of, you'd think that interaction would be better, but actually it was very frustrating for my wife and also for me. So anyway, don't worry, my son got fed. It was okay. But actually, this was a very frustrating interaction for both of us. So I thought, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way we can do this mobile video conferencing. And one of the problems I realized was that now we are doing video conferencing outside of the home, outside of controlled environments like the office and home, which is actually still quite controlled, where the camera is kind of sitting still and the subjects are sitting still. Here, we're actually moving things around. And so we started on this project thinking about mobile video conferencing. Here's some students that are working on it, and here's a picture that shows you what mobile video conferencing could be, right, out in the really open. So Brennan is a student who's actually been thinking about asking the question, actually, how do people actually do mobile video conferencing? What are some of the problems that they actually encounter when they do this sort of stuff? Omid has been thinking about, okay, so rather than holding the camera, what if we actually had a wearable camera, kind of like a Google Glass? How would that actually change video conferencing? And then finally, we have another project where we actually went out and explored what it would be like to engage in an activity outdoors with other people when you had this mobile video conferencing on. So I want to show you a couple of clips of the study that Omid did. So here, sorry, not Omid, Brennan. So here what happens is Brennan is actually has people doing a mobile video conferencing call, and he's trying to have them show them around campus. He's trying to have them plan up a fake menu, and we're just trying to see what happens. And so unsurprisingly, what you see is kind of a lot of overview behavior. People are trying to set the scene, like here, this is what cafeteria looks like. Here's the food that you can buy and that sort of stuff. So I'll just play this and you can actually watch. This is mostly unsurprising. Play. Whoa.
Okay, cool. Well, actually, I've looked what happened. I'm just looking for it right now. So this is it.
Yeah.
$1.43.
Really? How big is it? It's really... Okay.
So this is mostly unsurprising behavior, and actually you can see that things seem to be mostly going okay here. If you dive really deep into this and think about it for a little bit more of a moment though, you can see that the video quality completely stinks. And actually, when she was kind of panning to show the whole cafeteria, if you were watching that, you would either get sick, but if you didn't get sick, you probably actually wouldn't get a strong sense of what the cafeteria is like. Not because she was doing a bad job, but actually because the technology is not really kind of where we need it to be. So these are simple sort of technology problems that hopefully we can resolve with kind of more computational power or better cameras or a better, higher speed mobile network. But we actually saw a whole bunch of interesting behaviors where the mobile conferencing tool actually completely prevented. So in this case, what you're going to see here is pointing behavior that works and also pointing behavior that doesn't work. And this is something that's very normal in everyday conversation. So I can point at that sign, and you know that I'm pointing at a sign because I'm pointing at it. And you can hear me say that, and you can see my hand. What you're going to see is that that doesn't always happen. So here, the person with the mobile phone is pointing, and they're sort of pointing through the camera so the other person can see, which is great. When the person that doesn't have a mobile phone is pointing, so you can see she's actually pointing at the screen, the other person can't see this. And this actually causes some serious problems in terms of how people are interacting. Another simple example, well, it's very simple because it's short, but it's what's happening here is actually trying to synchronize conversation with sort of what the video camera is seeing is actually very difficult too. So what's happening in this clip is that this person here is on a shopping trip with the person that's holding the mobile phone, and they're trying to find a shirt together. And what you're going to see is, you know, one person's referring to one shirt, but they're talking about a different shirt, and then they switch views, and then now they're talking about the second shirt, and it's all very confusing for everybody, sort of.
The color, the other color, the blue color, that, yeah, maybe the white color, that one, how much? How much that?
And so what does that refer to? Does it refer to the blue one? Does it refer to the white one? Does it refer to this new red one that we're looking at? This is something that actually happened very frequently. And when I saw this, I was like, this is exactly what happened with me and my wife. I'd be like, is it this one? And she'd be talking about a different one, right? And you're like, no, that one. And then you're gonna do this back and forth, and it didn't work at all. Some other interesting things that we saw when we did this study was that people hold the phone in funny ways. So I'm not really sure what I expected, but I kind of thought people would be holding the phone like this, like, okay, this is what you can see in my world. But people actually tended to hold the phone like this, or kind of like this, right? And what we were told afterwards was it's because it's very awkward to be in a call with somebody where there's video, but if you kind of like did it like this, I suppose this is a little bit less conspicuous. I'm not sure, kind of looks sort of goofy to me. But what's interesting about this is if they're doing this, it means that the person that is shooting the video actually can't see what the other person is seeing at all, right? Looking at the video like this is actually quite challenging. So what this means is that there's all sorts of problems that are coming into play here that are preventing that video feed from being actually useful for anybody. And so are there ways that we can actually resolve this? And one of the projects, as I told you, Omid is working on this, where he's thinking about, okay, if we had wearable video cameras, something that's like attached to my glasses or attached to my ball cap or something like this, and I could free my hands basically, would this experience be any better? Could I use this experience to help people do tasks in the home? And the task that Omid has, I really love. So he just moved here from Iran, and he misses food from home, and like many grad students, he has no idea how to cook. So he needs his mother to help him to teach him how to cook the food that he likes to eat, right? So can we set up this video conferencing environment in such a way that can happen? Last project, I don't have a lot of time to get into, but one of the things that I kind of envisioned as we were doing this stuff is, well, we can do more than malls and indoor environments. We can actually go right outside, right? So my grandma is living in a home. She can't get outside very much anymore for whatever reason. Is there a way that I can share these experiences when I'm out? Well, I'm rarely this guy. But when I'm out and about, can I share these experiences with her? And we actually conducted a study to explore this question. This is the video of the study that you won't get to see, just because we're a little bit short on time. Okay, so thought a lot about video outside the house, right? And what problems come up when we actually just have this video conferencing tool that is now mobile, right? And so where does this leave us? So if you kind of following along with the program here, there were sort of three kind of core themes, right? Thinking about connecting with remote family members, living a healthier life for my son, and thinking about video outside the home. So to me, these are the things that actually make me happy right now. And so I'm trying to build projects with my students to kind of address some of these problems. So you might be sitting there going like, okay, well, that's great, Tony. Like, you can build a lot of stuff, but is it actually going to make anybody happy? So let me give you my completely unscientific opinion on this. So here's a little bro science warning. And tell you kind of what I think is going on. So when I think about happiness, and if you Google this, you'll find all sorts of like, how do I be happy? 15 steps to be a happier person, all this stuff. When I think about happiness, I think that it's some function of me. It's a function of the person. It's a function of the context that I'm living in, or the context that I surround myself in, and other people. And it's also a function of kind of my interactions with the context, my interaction with other people, and the other people's interaction with the context. So it's all of these things kind of mixed in with one another. When I think about the work that we are doing in terms of designing new technologies and exploring how to design new technologies, it's focused on building objects and tools and things that are in the context, right? And so if these tools and objects change the way that we interact with one another, or ask us to reflect on ourselves, then they're actually changing the nature of this function. So it's not to say that you have this stuff and you're happy, but it actually changes kind of the possibilities of how that function plays out. So when I think about the One Space project, when I think about the mobile video conferencing project, this is about providing new opportunities for interacting with other people, new sort of channels for that interaction to take place, right? So sharing life with family and having tools to do that is one way I think can kind of make me happier, at least. When I think about all of those tools about designing for health, here, okay, so this picture is actually like, here's a reflection of yourself, right? So obviously it's kind of like a cool little thing there. But these tools are trying to help us reflect on who we are and how we're kind of manifest in this data that's collected about us, to understand what is happening in our lives, to hopefully allow us to live healthier lives, right? So for me, when I think about happiness, it's about these three things: sharing life with family, living a healthier life, and going outside every once in a while, not just kind of sitting in front of my computer. And so for me, if I can build tools that help me do these things, then I think that I'm making myself happy. You saw some pictures of students kind of as we went. I wanted to talk about 3 students that I didn't get to show. These 3 students I think of as building enabling technologies for a lot of the projects that are happening here. Teddy is thinking about multi-display environments, so where rooms are sort of outfitted with interactive surfaces and ceilings and floors and stuff like that, and how we can actually do data and interact with data in those spaces. Jennifer is working on physical visualizations and physical prototyping tools, and thinking about prototyping with next generation electronics and prototyping materials. So very cool stuff. Xing Dong is a postdoc that's working with me, and he's thinking mostly about usable security. So this stuff's kind of very interesting avenue. So he's really concerned about kind of pin entry, and can we, like at your ATM or something like that, and worried about it, and worrying about it getting skimmed and stuff like that. So he's built all sorts of cool technologies that allow it to be more secure while still being usable. So kind of interesting design problem. Here are all the other students that I've talked about already. I should say that none of this work gets done without them. So they actually do most of the work. They're the engine that drives this whole thing. So I'm very appreciative of them. So I think with that, I want to just thank my collaborators and the folks that sponsor this work, and I will take questions. Thank you very much. Anybody's head look like this? Great. Let's just go home then.
I'm gonna hand this mic over with you because we are recording for later. I'd like to have the question be audible on the video.
Only easy questions, okay, Jonathan?
Okay. Thanks for the talk. It was very, very interesting, and it's good to see all the different work that you're doing. So I just wanted to bring up one thing and then a question. So I thought it was interesting that you picked the example of having children, because I'm sure you've heard of the studies that say like having children leads to decreased happiness, but increased
Yes.
satisfaction.
Sure.
So I was hoping, following up on that, if you can comment, do you think that these projects you're doing are increasing satisfaction and joy, or is it, as you say, happiness? And I know you've tried to define these terms again, but can you just be a little bit more specific in the context of satisfaction, joy, and happiness?
Satisfaction, joy, and happiness. Interesting. I hadn't thought about those as being separate things before. Hard question. And I asked for an easy one. I like the split that you make between joy and satisfaction, actually, right? Satisfaction might be the thing that you experience, the metric that you're, the thing that you're describing kind of over a long period of time, sort of like, am I satisfied? Joy is kind of like momentary, kind of like ups, kind of, sort of, right? It's sort of, so that's interesting. I suppose, you know, if you think about sort of the video conferencing technologies, I think of those as enabling kind of periods of joy, particularly when I see my son interact with my mom. I would say that like with the health technologies, I'm not really sure if they increase satisfaction, but the idea is that hopefully they bring you to a better place. You know, but beyond that, I'm not really sure. An interesting question. I don't know. Do you have a take? Do you want to answer the question for me?
I don't have an answer. It's something I'm really interested in.
Yeah.
In my master's, I tried to make software that made things more satisfactory.
Yeah.
And I got asked the question in my defense,
Yeah.
aren't you talking about joy?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wait, yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
One definition I like of joy is you can have too much of it. So if I like cake, I could like maybe have 2 pieces of cake. But if all I had was like 10,000 pieces of cake, I would hate it. Or
Yeah.
if I love Bach, I could listen to it for an hour. But if I had to listen for 10 hours, I would hate it.
Yeah.
So you can have too much of it, but you can't have too much happiness. So I tend to think happiness is a lens through which you view the world, just as depression is a lens. Whereas joy and satisfaction are momentary things caused by external stimulus. Whereas happiness is from the inside out.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, there's probably more thought than you've given it to it than I have. It just reminds me of this one kind of completely unrelated story. When I was a kid, and I would tell my mom that I liked something, she would do it all the time, like whatever it was. Like there were these snacks called Bugles that were awesome. They were like chips, but not chips. So my mom was very happy to buy them and pack them in my lunch. But she did it every single day. It made the Bugles not taste good. And I recently figured out why she was doing it. It's because when you're a parent and your kid eats the thing you give them, you're like, yes! I figured out the magical formula, and you just keep feeding it to him, and then he's sick of it, and you're like, I gotta figure this out again. Anyway, that's completely unrelated, but kind of made me think of that.
And then right this way.
You could repeat the question. Are any of these for sale? They look great.
Are any of these for sale? No. Usually what we do is we build prototypes to explore ideas. The way I think about it is that most of these things are, like, they barely work kind of in the lab. So they're like completely duct taped together sort of thing. And if you push it a little bit, it'll break. Happy to help somebody make it into something real, though. Yeah. Hey, boss.
Great talk, Tony. The one space in some of these videos, when you were just playing camera directly, it would be the, I guess, the real right to left, and when you want the mirror, you have to reverse things left to right. So there's a sort of technical thing there. And I'm also wondering, when you go to one space with 2 or more participants, how things might scale up.
So I want to, so the first question was something about flipping the camera around, sort of?
Yeah, is there some left-right reversal thing that you need to do to make, like the arm exercise that Brennan was doing, for example?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Richard's not here and Cody's not here, so I would have to ask them. So I don't really know. I can't remember. Sorry, so I don't have an answer. Yeah, maybe Lily knows? Oh, no, not really. Sorry. And sorry, your second question was?
One space, could you do it with 5?
Oh, yeah. In principle, this thing scales like in principle, the architecture is such that it can scale. I think in practice, the networks that we're working with we could only get about 4 working where it was still like reasonable. You can see here that, well, actually you can't see because it stopped, but you can see here that the frame rate's already kind of not fabulous. When you have more data kind of doing this, it kind of slows down. So we could get 4 on that worked reasonably. When we had 5, it didn't do so well. I think that if we had people that, if we kind of thought a little bit harder about how to architect this thing, compress the video somehow, we might be able to get away with a little bit more. But yeah. We have to flip the video. I'm not sure. Maybe.
In the, I think it was your third technology where you were trying to use a camera and you had the person with the camera and the person remotely watching.
Yep.
Have you ever thought of having the person who was at the other end operate the camera? Like,
yeah.
Then they sort of point.
You're giving away my research.
Pardon me?
Yeah. So go on.
You
Yeah.
have? Oh, okay. And so then that, and what you would display back to the person holding the camera is what the other person is pointing at, so they would be talking about the same subject.
Yes. We've thought about a lot of different ways of tackling this. So the problem that you're talking about is essentially the problem that, I'm sitting at the computer there, you're out there in the world, and I say, oh, I want you to look at that thing over there. I want you to look at the thing on the right. Right? And the difficulty of communicating that in a way that's efficient and all this stuff. So yes, this is something that we are exploring right now. We're exploring a bunch of different ways. We're trying flying helicopters. So maybe the mobile camera is actually flying helicopters. This sounds ridiculous, right? But this is just fun, right? We give it a try. We've thought about having a 360 camera that's kind of showing everything, so this person can see everything, and attaching that perhaps to like a headband. So you at the desktop can actually click on something, and on my headband it'll vibrate. So if it's going like this, I'll go like, oh, this is what you want to look at. So this is completely dorky, right? But the point is this, like we can try these things at very low cost because we're an academic institution, and we can see, is it, in what ways is this a bad idea? And perhaps in what ways might it be an interesting idea that we can try, right? So these are things that we are absolutely trying.
Can you name a technology that you just wish that the industry would create for us?
Technology that I wish the industry would create for me. Holy smokes. I'm sure as soon as I leave, I can come up with lots. I don't know, everyday life is interesting, right? We come up with all sorts of problems. So I wish my car could drive itself. So that's coming, it's close. Related to this stuff. Oh man. Oh shoot, I don't know. I never thought about that before. You want a better answer than that, right? Yeah, you would hope that I would. But so quick story about this talk. It was kind of funny. And this is a true story. So Lily had been hounding me for a long time, like, hey, can you give a talk? Can you give a talk? And finally I was like, okay, I'll give a talk. And I think I said yes maybe in May or June or something like this. And the talk was going to be in October. So I was like, oh, okay, I can forget about this for now. And then about 3 weeks ago, our department admin emailed around to say, hey, there's this talk. And I read the title. I'm like, that sounds really fun. Like, this sounds awesome. And then I was like, what the? I'm giving it? I guess I better be there. So anyway, so that story was hopefully to buy me some time while I thought about an interesting technology. I think that when I think about the home, and I think about video, and I think about the TV, I don't know if we're ready for this as a culture, but it would be really interesting if one of the pixels, like, so you know how like in principle your TV has an RG and B like pixels. Wouldn't it be interesting if one of those pixels was an like eye pixel, like so it could actually see out? And I just think wouldn't it be interesting if my home could actually see what I was doing and figure out, and I could use that kind of piece of information to do whatever. So if my home knows that I'm in a rush, maybe it kind of shows me information as I go. Like now I'm thinking like screens everywhere and all this sort of stuff. But I just think like, wouldn't it be interesting if my home knew more about what I was doing so they could help me to accomplish things that I want to accomplish? I thought about that. What's that? Yeah, right. Oh, it was interesting. I was talking to this guy at Google, and they were talking about Google Now. So Google Now is this thing that kind of, on your phone, it says, like, hey, it looks like you're about to leave work. This is what traffic looks like. Or like, hey, it looks like you're in San Francisco. This is what the weather is like. Or hey, you know, all this stuff. And this is actually really creepy because you never tell it to do this. And it was interesting because I was talking to this guy, and I'm like, aren't you guys worried about this? That people will think it's so creepy that they'll just turn it off. And he says, we're trying to make it so cool that people go, wow, that's cool, before they say, hey, that's creepy. And I think this is the same thing for this kind of like in-home technology. Like if it knows about you, like maybe it can do some cool stuff, but you have to get past the, wow, that's really creepy factor first. Yeah, that's, I don't know.
It's not that my phone knows about it, it's that Google knows.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
What are you and your mother doing these days to interact with your child?
Ah, right. So the question is, what are me and my mom doing? So I told you that this technology is not good enough to really deploy. And so we mostly use an iPad. Like, so my mom is on her phone or whatever, and we use an iPad at home. And I experience all of these problems that Brennan kind of outlined. It's super interesting kind of how hard it is. You wouldn't think it, right? So following my son around like this is really kind of a pain, right? Like, so I'm kind of showing him, and he's running around because he doesn't want to look at my mom, because my mom's just sitting there looking at him and trying to talk to him. Like I said, like no kid likes to talk. And so it's funny because I'm doing this, and my mom is here, like in big screen, like laughing and saying, hey, look over here. But she's looking at me, like I'm looking at her, right? So my son has no idea. And so you could actually kind of flip it around and use this camera, but then it's really hard to make sure that it stays in frame. And then of course you get bored of this, so you kind of set it down. And then when you set it down, my son's never in frame because he's just run off somewhere else, right? So all of these problems that we're kind of exploring here, I kind of talk about as outside of the home problems, but actually I experience it as in my home as well. And I always think there's got to be a better way. We could try better things. And I think about this screen that can see my room, and I don't have to, move this camera around. Like, I think that would be really cool. Wouldn't it be cool if my mom could like focus where that thing is looking, right? So I think about all that stuff. So, yeah, we live in the future because I can pay by tapping my phone on stuff. But in my home, we don't really live in the future that well with the video conferencing.
Anyone else? Well, I guess we'll wrap up. I think we still have food next door if anybody wants to continue to have a little snack and a little social time. I'm not sure
I'll stick around for a little bit.
What Tony's schedule is, but you're more than welcome to hang out. For everyone's information, my name is Daryl Rasmussen, and I'm the president